the early autumn air in Maplewood carried a crispness that hinted at the winter to come. Leaves painted in shades of amber and crimson fluttered down the quiet streets, blanketing the sidewalks in vibrant color. The small town seemed to exist in a perpetual state of tranquility, its charm rooted in the familiarity of its routines. Everyone knew everyone, and change was a rare and cautious visitor. Emma Hartman had lived in Maplewood her entire life. At 32, she had carved out a quiet, predictable existence as a high school literature teacher. Her days were spent guiding students through the works of Whitman and Dickinson, and her evenings were dedicated to grading papers or curling up with a novel in her modest, book-filled home. To the outside world, Emma's life seemed serene, even enviable. But beneath her composed exterior lay scars from a past she rarely spoke of, choices that had left her hesitant to risk her heart again. It was a Saturday afternoon when Emma found herself at the Maplewood Cultural Center, a small but cherished institution that housed rotating art exhibits. Encouraged by a colleague who insisted she needed to get out more, Emma had reluctantly traded her solitude for an afternoon of polite small talk and casual browsing. She wandered through the exhibit, her interest mildly piqued by the photography on display. The images were striking, raw, evocative, and brimming with emotion. She stopped in front of a photograph that caught her attention. It was a black-and-white portrait of a young woman standing in the rain, her face tilted toward the sky, droplets clinging to her eyelashes. There was a haunting vulnerability in her expression, as though she were both surrendering to and defying the storm. The artist's name, Isabel Blake, was scrawled neatly on the small placard beneath the frame. "Do you like it?" a voice asked from behind her. Emma turned, startled. Standing there was a woman who could have stepped straight out of one of the photographs. Her dark hair was cut in a messy bob, and her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, held an intensity that made Emma's breath catch. She was dressed casually in a leather jacket and jeans, but there was something undeniably magnetic about her presence. "It's beautiful," Emma replied, her voice faltering slightly. "The way it captures so much emotion. It's like the subject is telling a story without saying a word." The woman smiled, a slow, almost mischievous curve of her lips. "That's exactly what I was going for." Emma blinked, realizing who she was speaking to. "You're Isabel Blake?" "Call me Izzy," the woman said, extending her hand. "And you are?" "Emma." "Emma Hartman," she said, taking Izzy's hand. The handshake was firm, lingering just a second too long. "I'm a teacher here." "Literature?" Izzy's smile widened. "A storyteller in your own way, then." Emma felt her cheeks flush. There was something about Izzy's gaze, direct and unflinching, that made her feel both exposed and seen. "I suppose so," she said, her tone more measured now. They fell into conversation easily, discussing the exhibit and the creative process behind the photographs. Izzy's passion for her work was evident in every word, her hands gesturing animatedly as she described her approach to capturing authenticity through her lens. Emma found herself captivated not just by Izzy's words but by the way she spoke, with confidence, with fire, with a freedom that felt foreign to Emma's cautious world. As the afternoon wore on, Emma learned that Izzy had recently moved to Maplewood from Brooklyn, seeking a quieter environment to focus on her art. But, Izzy added with a smirk, small towns have their own challenges. Everyone seems to know everyone else's business. Emma laughed softly. "That's Maplewood for you. Gossip is practically a sport here." "Good to know," Izzy said, her tone playful but her eyes thoughtful. "I'll try to keep my scandals to a minimum." The comment drew a genuine laugh from Emma, and for the first time in what felt like years, she felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name. It was disconcerting and exhilarating all at once. As the exhibit began to wind down, Izzy leaned against the wall, her expression turning serious. "Thank you for spending so much time talking with me, Emma. I don't think I've had a conversation this interesting since I got here." Emma hesitated, unsure how to respond. "You're easy to talk to," she said finally, her voice quiet. "So are you," Izzy replied, her gaze steady and searching. There it was again, that spark, that connection that seemed to hum in the air between them. Emma felt the familiar instinct to retreat, to protect herself from whatever this was before it could take root. But something about Izzy made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the way she seemed so sure of herself, so unapologetically authentic. Or perhaps it was the way she made Emma feel, alive, awake, and just a little bit reckless. Maybe I'll see you around, Izzy said, her tone light but her eyes lingering on Emma's face as though she were memorizing it. Maybe, Emma replied, her heart pounding as she watched Izzy walk away. As Emma left the gallery and stepped into the fading sunlight, she felt the weight of her usual solitude pressing against the newfound flutter in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of connection that didn't need to mean anything. But deep down she knew better. Emma Hartman was no stranger to quiet longing. It had followed her like a shadow for years, a dull ache she had learned to live with. But since meeting Izzy Blake, that ache had transformed into something sharper, more urgent. The enigmatic photographer had a way of dismantling Emma's carefully constructed defenses with ease. A single glance from Izzy could make Emma feel as though her most guarded thoughts were on display, and every conversation between them seemed to chip away at the walls Emma had spent years building. Izzy's art reflected her personality, bold, unrestrained, and unapologetically honest. Her photographs captured not just moments but emotions, raw and unfiltered. When Emma visited Izzy's studio for the first time, a converted loft on the edge of Maplewood, it was like stepping into another world. The walls were lined with prints of faces, landscapes, and abstract compositions, each one vibrating with a kind of restless energy that mirrored Izzy herself. "This one's my favorite," Izzy said one evening, gesturing toward a black-and-white image of an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench. The woman's head rested on the man's shoulder, her eyes closed in peaceful contentment. They'd been together for 65 years. "I asked them what their secret was, and you know what she said?" Emma shook her head, captivated by the photo and by Izzy's voice, which was low and full of reverence. She said, "We chose each other every day." Izzy's gaze shifted to Emma, her blue eyes piercing. "I think that's the most beautiful thing about love. The choice. The bravery of it." Emma swallowed hard, her pulse quickening under Izzy's scrutiny. "Bravery doesn't come easily to everyone," she said quietly, her eyes dropping to the floor. Izzy stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "Maybe not. But it's worth it." Their conversations were always like this, laden with unspoken truths, each word pulling Emma closer to a place she wasn't sure she was ready to go. Izzy didn't push, but her presence alone was a kind of challenge, an invitation to step out of the shadows Emma had grown so comfortable in. In a town like Maplewood, discretion was a survival skill. Its cobblestone streets and charming storefronts belied the sharp curiosity of its residents. Gossip traveled faster than the morning mail, and Emma knew that even the smallest deviation from the norm could set tongues wagging. She had seen it happen before: whispers about a teacher's divorce, rumors about a store owner's financial troubles. The idea of being the subject of such scrutiny was enough to keep her on edge. Yet the more time she spent with Izzy, the harder it became to care. Their interactions started innocently enough. Coffee at the bookstore cafe, chance meetings at the farmer's market, long walks along the wooded trails on the outskirts of town. But even in those seemingly ordinary moments, the pull between them was undeniable. Emma found herself lingering longer than necessary, her heart racing whenever their hands brushed or their laughter filled the quiet spaces. One evening, after a particularly long walk, they stopped by the river that wound its way through the forest. The setting sun painted the water in hues of gold and crimson, and for a moment, the world felt impossibly still. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you," Emma admitted, her voice barely audible over the sound of the river. She kept her eyes on the water, afraid to look at Izzy and see the response written on her face. Izzy didn't reply immediately. Instead, she reached down, picking up a smooth stone and skipping it across the surface of the river. "Good different or bad different?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching when Emma finally turned to face her. "Good," Emma said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Definitely good." Izzy's gaze softened, and for a moment, Emma thought she might close the distance between them. But instead Izzy simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that made Emma's chest tighten, and turned back to the river. Still, the risks were never far from Emma's mind. The first time someone recognized them at the cafe, she felt a pang of panic, her cheeks flushing as she exchanged a polite hello with an older woman she knew from the school board. Izzy had noticed, of course. "Relax," Izzy had said afterward, her tone reassuring but tinged with amusement. "We're just two friends having coffee. No one's going to think twice." But Emma wasn't so sure. Maplewood wasn't the kind of place where people didn't think twice. And though she wanted desperately to believe Izzy's easy confidence, the fear of exposure gnawed at her. It wasn't just her reputation at stake, it was her career, her carefully constructed life. And yet, the thought of walking away from Izzy felt even more terrifying. The dichotomy was exhausting. The cautious, composed teacher who lived by the rules, and the woman who couldn't stop thinking about the photographer who had turned her world upside down. Izzy's free-spirited nature was intoxicating, but it also highlighted just how confined Emma's own life had become. "You think too much," Izzy teased one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the park. "Sometimes you just have to let go." Emma glanced at her, the words sparking equal parts admiration and frustration. "Not everyone can live as fearlessly as you, Izzy." Izzy tilted her head, studying Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Fearless isn't the same as reckless. It's about knowing what's worth the risk." Emma didn't reply, but the words stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after they parted ways that night. The tension between what they wanted and what they feared was a constant undercurrent, threading through every interaction. Emma's hesitations were palpable, but so was the longing that shone in her eyes when she looked at Izzy. And for Izzy, who had always worn her heart on her sleeve, the secrecy was a weight she struggled to bear. "I'm not used to hiding," Izzy admitted one evening as they sat in her studio, the soft glow of string lights casting a warm ambience over the room. "It's not who I am." Emma hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. "I know. And I hate that I'm asking you to." Izzy shook her head, reaching out to take Emma's hand. "You're not asking. But I need to know if we, are worth fighting for." Emma met her gaze, her throat tightening. "You are," she said, her voice trembling. "You are." It wasn't a promise she made lightly. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, Emma couldn't deny the truth any longer. Izzy had found her way into her heart and there was no going back. The forest surrounding Maplewood's river was alive with the sounds of summer. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant trill of birdsong and the gentle murmur of the water. Izzy had chosen the spot for its untouched beauty, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. She had been planning the photoshoot for weeks, envisioning the interplay of natural light and the shimmering reflections off the river. But now that she was here, her focus was split. Emma Hartman stood a few feet away, watching Izzy adjust her camera on its tripod. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on Emma's face and the simple sundress she wore. Izzy thought she had never seen anything, or anyone, look so effortlessly beautiful. "I feel like I should be doing something," Emma said, crossing her arms self-consciously. "I'm not great at just standing here." "You're doing plenty," Izzy replied without looking up, her tone teasing. "You're being patient while I obsess over lighting, and that's more than enough." Emma smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it. Being around Izzy always made her feel like she was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't just attraction. It was the way Izzy seemed to draw out parts of her she had long since buried. Around her, Emma felt exposed and alive all at once, a heady mix that left her both exhilarated and terrified. Izzy adjusted her lens one final time and straightened up, turning to face Emma. "Okay," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I think I'm ready. Let's find the perfect spot." They wandered along the riverbank, the soft earth muffling their steps. Izzy carried her camera, her eyes scanning the surroundings with an artist's precision. Emma followed quietly, her heart racing with every stolen glance at Izzy's profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her lips pursed in concentration. She told herself to calm down, that this was just another afternoon like the many they had shared over the past few months. But deep down she knew that wasn't true. "There," Izzy said suddenly, pointing to a small clearing where the sunlight poured through the trees in golden streams. "That's it." Emma followed Izzy into the clearing, her sandals brushing against the tall grass. Izzy crouched down, angling her camera toward the river, and gestured for Emma to stand by the water's edge. "Just look out over the river," Izzy instructed. "Pretend I'm not here." "That's easier said than done," Emma muttered, but she obeyed, letting her gaze settle on the shimmering surface of the water. The click of Izzy's camera broke the quiet rhythm of the forest. Emma tried to focus on the scenery, on the sound of the river, but she couldn't ignore the weight of Izzy's gaze through the lens. It was as though Izzy wasn't just taking her picture. She was seeing her, really seeing her, in a way that no one else ever had. "Perfect," Izzy murmured, stepping closer. Stay just like that. Emma's breath caught as Izzy moved nearer, her presence a magnetic pull. She could feel the warmth radiating from Izzy's body, could smell the faint hint of citrus and lavender on her skin. Her pulse quickened, a quiet thrill coursing through her as she realized how close they were. You have no idea how beautiful you are, do you? Izzy said softly, her voice carrying the weight of truth. Emma turned to face her, her cheeks flushing. Izzy, The words faltered as Izzy looked at her, the intensity in her eyes rendering Emma speechless. It was as though all the unspoken things between them, the stolen glances, the lingering touches, the late-night messages that grew bolder with each exchange, had risen to the surface, undeniable and impossible to ignore. Izzy took a small step forward, her hand brushing against Emma's. The touch was light, hesitant, but it sent a spark through both of them. Emma's breath hitched, her heart pounding as she searched Izzy's face for some sign of hesitation. She found none. I can't stop thinking about you, Izzy admitted, her voice low but firm. I've tried, Emma. Believe me, I've tried. But I can't. Emma's defenses, already fragile, crumbled under the weight of Izzy's confession. She wanted to protest, to remind Izzy of the risks, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she closed the gap between them, her heart leaping as Izzy's lips brushed against hers in a tentative, stolen kiss. The world seemed to fall away. The kiss deepened, years of restraint and uncertainty dissolving in the heat of the moment. Izzy's hands found Emma's waist, pulling her closer, while Emma's fingers tangled in Izzy's hair, her inhibitions slipping away like water through her hands. The forest around them felt alive, the air thick with the hum of nature and the quiet urgency of their connection. When they finally broke apart, both women were breathless, their foreheads resting together as they struggled to process what had just happened. This is dangerous, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. I know, Izzy replied, her hands still resting lightly on Emma's hips. But I don't care. Not anymore. Emma searched Izzy's face, her fear warring with the undeniable pull she felt toward her. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. It's not just about me. My job, my life. Then let me carry some of it, Izzy said, her tone fierce but tender. You don't have to do this alone, Emma. You don't have to hide. The words were both a challenge and a promise, and for the first time in years, Emma felt the faintest flicker of hope. She didn't know what the future held or if she had the strength to face the storm that would inevitably come. But as she looked into Izzy's eyes, she knew one thing for certain. She didn't want to let go. The decision to keep their relationship a secret had been mutual, but for Emma and Izzy, it soon became clear that secrecy carried its own weight. At first, their clandestine meetings felt thrilling, an escape from the constraints of their daily lives. They found refuge in quiet corners of Maplewood, late-night drives to secluded trails, whispered conversations in Izzy's studio, and evenings spent tangled together in Emma's dimly lit living room, the outside world shut out completely. But as weeks turned into months, the excitement began to give way to tension. It was a Saturday evening and Emma sat on the edge of her couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The school board gala was in 2 days, and she couldn't shake the fear that someone might start asking questions about her growing absences from town events or the unexplained hours she spent away from her usual routines. Across from her, Izzy was lounging in the armchair, her legs draped over one side as she sipped a glass of wine. She seemed completely at ease, a stark contrast to Emma's tightly wound posture. But there was an undercurrent of something in Izzy's demeanor, something restless and unresolved. You're quiet tonight, Izzy observed, her gaze sharp as it settled on Emma. Emma looked up, startled. I'm just thinking. Izzy tilted her head, studying Emma with a mixture of curiosity and concern. About us. Emma hesitated, then nodded. It's not that I don't want this. I do. But, Izzy, you don't understand what it's like for me. If someone finds out, if the school board finds out, I could lose everything. Izzy set her glass down on the table, leaning forward. And you think I don't get that? You think I don't know what it's like to have people judge you for who you are? That's not what I meant, Emma said quickly, guilt flashing across her face. It's just different for me. You've always been so open, so fearless. But I can't. I've built my whole life around being safe. Izzy's expression softened, but there was still an edge of frustration in her voice. Safe isn't the same as happy, Emma. Hiding isn't the same as living. Emma looked away, her chest tightening. She wanted to argue, to tell Izzy that it wasn't that simple. But deep down she knew Izzy was right. The cracks in their carefully constructed bubble of secrecy began to widen. Izzy, who had always lived her life unapologetically, started to chafe against the boundaries of their arrangement. She missed the freedom of being able to hold Emma's hand in public, to share a laugh without worrying about who might overhear. For Emma, the stress of balancing her growing feelings for Izzy with her fear of exposure became an almost constant weight on her shoulders. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Emma arrived at Izzy's studio visibly tense. She barely managed to smile as she stepped inside, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Izzy, who had been editing photos on her laptop, looked up and frowned. "Rough day?" Izzy asked gently, rising from her chair. Emma nodded, sinking into the worn couch by the window. "The usual," she said, her voice flat. "Staff meetings, lesson plans, and the ever-present worry that someone's going to figure out why I keep sneaking off." Izzy sat beside her, her brow furrowed with concern. "Emma, you don't have to keep doing this alone. We're in this together, remember?" Emma sighed, leaning her head back against the couch. "I know. But sometimes it feels like I'm dragging you into my mess. You deserve better than this." Izzy reached out, taking Emma's hand in hers. "What I deserve is to love who I love without feeling like it's a crime," she said softly. "And so do you." Emma's eyes welled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that, Izzy. I don't know if I'll ever be." Izzy's grip on her hand tightened, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're stronger than you think. But you have to want it, Emma. You have to believe it's worth the fight." The tension between them came to a head one humid July night. They had met at the edge of the forest, their usual spot, but the air between them was thick with unspoken frustrations. Izzy had been unusually quiet, her movements restless as they walked along the riverbank. When Emma finally asked what was wrong, Izzy stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "I can't keep doing this," Izzy said, her voice sharp but trembling. "Sneaking around, hiding like we're ashamed of what we have. It's killing me, Emma." Emma froze, the words hitting her like a blow. "Izzy, I'm not ashamed of you," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "It's not about that. It's about protecting what little stability I have." "Protecting it from what?" Izzy shot back. "From people who have no right to judge you. From a town that will find something to gossip about no matter what you do." Emma's chest tightened, her own frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't understand. My whole career, my entire life, is built on being someone people respect. If this gets out, if we get out, it's all over for me." Izzy took a step closer, her expression fierce. "And what about us, Emma? What about what we have? Does that mean less to you than what people think?" Emma didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally she whispered, "I don't know." Izzy flinched as though she'd been struck, her face crumpling with hurt. For a moment, it looked like she might turn and walk away. But instead she took a deep breath, her voice soft but resolute. "I love you, Emma," Izzy said, her eyes glistening. "And I can't keep pretending that hiding it doesn't hurt me. But I can't make this decision for you. You have to decide what you want." Emma watched helplessly as Izzy walked back toward the trail, her silhouette fading into the shadows. For the first time in years, Emma felt truly alone, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a storm. And she wasn't sure if she could weather it. The atmosphere at Maplewood High School was heavy with the monotony of another routine week. Emma moved through the halls with the kind of practiced calm she had perfected over the years, nodding at students, exchanging polite pleasantries with colleagues, and avoiding any interaction that might lead to questions she wasn't ready to answer. But no matter how tightly she controlled her facade, she couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching her more closely than usual. That someone was Sarah. Sarah Whitaker had been a colleague and friend of Emma's for nearly a decade. They'd shared countless coffee breaks, vented about grading papers, and attended the same town events. But lately Sarah had become sharper. Her once casual inquiries into Emma's life had taken on an edge, and her curiosity about Emma's comings and goings felt more pointed than friendly. "So where were you last night?" Sarah asked one morning in the teacher's lounge, her voice light but her gaze intent. Emma froze mid-sip of her coffee, her heartbeat quickening. "Last night," she echoed, stalling for time. "Oh, just around. Reading mostly." Sarah's eyebrows lifted, her expression almost amused. You've been doing a lot of just around lately. Busy weekends, late evenings. Must be some book. Emma forced a laugh, trying to hide the nervous energy bubbling beneath the surface. You know me. Once I get into a good story, I lose track of time. Sarah didn't press further, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Emma knew her too well to believe that the conversation was over. The unraveling began 2 days later. Izzy had invited Sarah to her studio under the guise of a town photography project. It wasn't unusual for Izzy to seek out local subjects or collaborate with Maplewood residents, and Sarah, ever eager to be involved in community happenings, had accepted without hesitation. But what should have been an innocuous visit turned into something far more dangerous. Izzy's studio was a reflection of her personality, vivid, eclectic, and full of life. Photographs lined the walls, a mixture of candid moments and striking landscapes, each one telling its own story. Sarah wandered the space with interest, making polite comments about the work while Izzy answered questions in her usual animated way. It wasn't until Sarah approached a corner table covered in loose prints that the trouble began. "Oh, what's this one?" Sarah asked, picking up a photograph without waiting for an answer. Izzy's smile faltered. "That's not part of the exhibit," she said carefully, stepping closer. But it was too late. The photo in Sarah's hand was of Emma. She was standing by the river, her hair catching the light and her expression soft, unguarded. It was a beautiful shot, but there was something unmistakably intimate about it. The way Emma looked at the camera, at Izzy, was enough to give anyone pause. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she studied the image. "Emma," she said, her tone laced with surprise and something sharper. "This is Emma, isn't it?" Izzy hesitated, weighing her response. "She's a friend," she said finally, keeping her voice even. "I was testing the lighting that day and she happened to be there." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She looked at Izzy, then back at the photograph, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Funny," she said, her voice carefully casual. "Emma's not usually one for spontaneous photo shoots." Izzy crossed her arms, her expression cooling. "She's allowed to try new things, isn't she?" Sarah set the photo down, but her curiosity was far from satisfied. "Of course. Everyone needs a little adventure now and then." The tension in the room was palpable, and Izzy could feel the walls closing in. She knew Sarah wasn't just making idle conversation anymore. The woman was sharp, and the seed of suspicion had clearly taken root. Emma was grading papers in her classroom later that evening when her phone buzzed with a message from Izzy. The words made her stomach drop. "Sarah found the photo. She knows something's up." Emma's hands trembled as she read the text, the carefully constructed shell of her life cracking wide open. She typed back hastily. "What do you mean she knows? Did you tell her anything?" Izzy's response was immediate. "No, but she's not stupid. Be ready." Emma put her phone down, her mind racing. She could picture Sarah's face, the way her eyes sharpened when she was piecing something together. The thought of her colleague, her friend, digging into her personal life sent a wave of panic crashing over her. If Sarah decided to confront her, or worse, spread rumors, everything Emma had worked so hard to protect could unravel in an instant. The confrontation came the next morning. Emma was tidying up her desk when Sarah appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Got a minute?" Emma's pulse spiked, but she forced a smile. "Of course. What's up?" Sarah stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The air between them grew heavy as she approached the desk, her gaze fixed on Emma. "I was at Izzy Blake's studio yesterday," Sarah began, her tone measured. "She's quite the photographer." Emma nodded stiffly. "She is. She's also very protective of her work," Sarah continued, her eyes narrowing. "But I couldn't help noticing one photo in particular." "Of you?" Emma's stomach turned. "She asked me to help her with some lighting," she said quickly, the rehearsed excuse falling from her lips. "It was nothing." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "It didn't look like nothing, Emma. The way you were looking at the camera." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Emma's throat tightened. "You're reading too much into it." "Am I?" Sarah pressed, her voice soft but pointed. "Because I've known you for years, Emma. And lately you've been different. Distracted. Secretive." Emma clenched her fists beneath the desk, struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm allowed to have a life outside of work, Sarah." Of course you are, Sarah said, stepping closer. But if there's something going on, something that could complicate things, I think you should tell me. Before someone else finds out. The words were a warning, thinly veiled as concern. Emma felt a wave of anger rise within her, but it was quickly overtaken by fear. She didn't know how much Sarah suspected, but she couldn't risk giving her more ammunition. There's nothing to find out, Emma said firmly, meeting Sarah's gaze. I appreciate your concern, but you're wrong. For a moment, Sarah seemed to consider backing down. But then she smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a chill down Emma's spine. If you say so. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Emma to collapse into her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the storm was coming, knew that Sarah wouldn't let this go. And for the first time, Emma realized that keeping her secret might cost her more than she ever imagined. The days following Sarah's thinly veiled confrontation were suffocating for Emma. Every interaction at work felt like walking a tightrope, her words and actions weighed down by the fear of discovery. Sarah's pointed questions hadn't let up. They only grew sharper, her curiosity transforming into a quiet but relentless pursuit of answers. At home, Emma found solace in Izzy's arms, but even their moments of intimacy were tinged with a creeping unease. The pressure of their secret, coupled with the constant fear of exposure, created an undercurrent of tension that neither of them could ignore. Izzy tried to reassure Emma, but the photographer's inherent boldness often clashed with Emma's deeply ingrained caution. One night, as they lay in bed wrapped in each other's warmth, Emma's voice broke the silence. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she whispered, her face buried against Izzy's shoulder. Izzy shifted, pulling back just enough to look at her. Do what? Love me? Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that made Emma's chest tighten. No, Emma said quickly, her hand reaching to cup Izzy's face. It's not that. It's the hiding, the constant fear. It feels like a storm is always right on the horizon. Izzy pressed her forehead to Emma's, her breath warm against her skin. Storms pass, Emma. But what we have, it's real. It's worth standing in the rain for. Emma closed her eyes, willing herself to believe Izzy's words. But doubt lingered like a shadow, dark and unyielding. The night of the school's benefit dinner arrived with an air of tension Emma couldn't shake. The event was one of Maplewood's most anticipated gatherings, a chance for teachers, parents, and community leaders to come together for a good cause. The venue, a beautifully decorated banquet hall, was buzzing with laughter and conversation, but Emma's nerves were raw. Izzy had been hired to photograph the event, a development Emma had greeted with mixed emotions. While she loved seeing Izzy in her element, the idea of her weaving through a crowd that included Sarah made Emma's stomach churn. She had tried to convince herself that Sarah wouldn't push the matter tonight, but the woman's recent persistence made Emma doubt her own reassurances. Emma spotted Izzy almost immediately upon entering the hall. She stood near the stage, her camera poised as she captured candid moments of laughter and animated conversation. Even in the midst of her work, Izzy's presence was magnetic. Emma's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and longing, but the moment was fleeting. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Sarah approach Izzy. Emma's chest tightened as she watched the two women exchange words. Sarah's expression was polite, even friendly, but there was something calculating in her posture. Izzy, ever composed, smiled and nodded, her body language relaxed. To anyone else, it would have looked like a casual conversation, but to Emma, it felt like the air was thickening with danger. As the night wore on, Emma found herself watching Izzy's every move. The paranoia gnawed at her, each interaction Izzy had with Sarah, or anyone else, fanning the flames of her unease. By the time the event ended, Emma's nerves were frayed beyond repair. They didn't speak until they reached Emma's house. The car ride had been tense, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the engine. As soon as they stepped inside, Emma turned to Izzy, her voice sharp with the frustration she had been holding back. Why were you talking to Sarah? She demanded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Izzy blinked, caught off guard by the sudden accusation. Because she approached me, she replied, her tone calm but firm. She was asking about the event. And what did you tell her? Emma pressed, her voice rising. Did you mention me? Did you let anything slip? Izzy's eyes narrowed, her patience thinning. What do you think I said, Emma? That I'm madly in love with her colleague and we're sneaking around behind everyone's backs. Emma flinched at the sarcasm but pushed forward, her voice trembling. You don't understand how dangerous this is for me. If she finds out, if anyone finds out, my career could be over. Izzy's composure cracked. I do understand, Emma. But you're acting like I'm the enemy here. I've been careful. I've done everything I can to protect you, to protect us. But I can't keep walking on eggshells every second of every day. Emma's face softened, guilt flickering across her features. But her fear was louder than her remorse. It's not just about us, Izzy. It's about my entire life. And what about mine? Izzy shot back, her voice breaking. Do you think it's easy for me hiding how I feel about you? Pretending we're nothing when all I want to do is tell the world how much you mean to me? Emma's breath hitched, the raw emotion in Izzy's voice cutting through her defenses. For a moment she didn't know how to respond. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this. Izzy's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. Maybe you don't want to. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Emma's chest tightened, panic flaring as she stepped closer. Izzy, that's not true. Isn't it? Izzy said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You're so afraid of what might happen that you're forgetting what's already here. What we have. Emma reached out, but Izzy stepped back, her voice trembling. I love you, Emma. But I can't be the only one fighting for this. Without waiting for a response, Izzy turned and walked out the door, leaving Emma standing alone in the quiet house. The sound of the door closing echoed in her ears, and for the first time, Emma realized just how much she stood to lose. Not just her career or her reputation, but the one person who had made her feel alive again. And as the night stretched on, the weight of that loss became unbearable. The morning air in Maplewood High School carried the faint scent of fresh coffee and floor cleaner, but to Emma, it was suffocating. She had barely slept after Izzy's departure, her mind racing with guilt and uncertainty. As she made her way down the hall, the familiar surroundings felt alien, every passing glance from a colleague or student triggering a surge of paranoia. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice Sarah waiting for her outside her classroom. Morning, Emma, Sarah said, her tone deceptively casual. Emma forced a polite smile, her stomach sinking. Morning, Sarah. What's up? Sarah gestured toward the empty classroom. Can we talk for a minute? Privately. Emma hesitated, her hand tightening around the handle of her bag. Sure, she said finally, stepping aside to let Sarah enter. Once the door clicked shut, Sarah turned to face Emma, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. I've been meaning to ask you about something, she began, her voice calm but carrying an edge. Emma's heart started to race. What is it? Izzy Blake, Sarah said, watching Emma closely. You've been spending a lot of time with her lately, haven't you? Emma stiffened, her pulse pounding in her ears. She's new to town. I've been helping her get settled. Why? Sarah smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. It's just interesting. You've never been one to go out of your way for people before. And yet here you are, constantly disappearing, always a little distracted. Emma forced herself to keep her voice steady. I'm allowed to have a life outside of school, Sarah. Of course you are, Sarah replied, taking a step closer. But you're not just helping her settle in, are you? Emma froze, her breath catching. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Sarah said, arching an eyebrow. Because I saw that photo of you at her studio. The one where you're standing by the river. You weren't just posing for a picture, Emma. The way you were looking at her. It wasn't exactly professional. Emma's hands clenched at her sides, panic flaring in her chest. It's not what you think, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Izzy and I are friends. That's all. Sarah tilted her head, her gaze narrowing. You're lying. I'm not, Emma insisted, her voice rising. You're reading too much into it. Sarah took another step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Am I? Because if you're hiding something, Emma, people are going to find out. And when they do, it won't just be me asking questions. Emma swallowed hard, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but there's nothing to find. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then sighed, her tone softening slightly. Emma, I'm not your enemy. But if you're in over your head, you need to think about the consequences. For you, for the school, for everyone involved. Emma didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of Sarah's words pressed down on her, suffocating and inescapable. Meanwhile, in the quiet solitude of her studio, Izzy sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. She had been editing photos all morning, trying to keep herself busy and push thoughts of her argument with Emma out of her mind. But when a new email notification popped up, her attention shifted. The subject line sent a chill down her spine. "You should know." Izzy hesitated before clicking it, her stomach knotting with dread. The email contained no message, only a series of attached photos. As she opened them, her heart sank. The images were of her and Emma, taken from a distance. There was one of them walking along the river, their bodies close and their hands brushing. Another showed them standing by Izzy's car late at night, Emma's face illuminated by the glow of a street lamp. But the final photo was the most damning. A shot of them in Izzy's studio, their foreheads pressed together in a moment of quiet intimacy. Izzy's hands trembled as she stared at the images. Whoever had taken them had been careful, deliberate. The thought of someone lurking in the shadows, watching their most vulnerable moments, filled her with a cold, gnawing fear. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Who had taken the photos? And why had they sent them now? Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. It was Emma. "Hey," Izzy said, her voice shaky. "Izzy," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think Sarah knows. She confronted me this morning." Izzy closed her eyes, the tension in her chest tightening. "Emma, there's more," she said quietly. "I just got an email. Someone sent me photos. Of us." Emma went silent on the other end of the line, but Izzy could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Photos," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of photos?" Izzy hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Of us together. Walking by the river. In the studio. They're intimate. Whoever took them, they've been following us." Emma let out a shaky breath, her voice rising in panic. "Izzy, what are we going to do? If these get out, if Sarah gets her hands on them?" "We'll figure it out," Izzy said firmly, though her own fear was mounting. "But first we need to stay calm." "Calm?" Emma's voice cracked. "Someone is stalking us, Izzy. They know about us. This isn't just about my job anymore. This could ruin both of our lives." Izzy felt her resolve waver, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I'm coming over," she said. "We'll deal with this together." Emma didn't respond immediately, but when she finally spoke, her voice was laced with desperation. "Please hurry." As Izzy grabbed her keys and headed for the door, a single thought consumed her. The walls they had built around their love were crumbling, and the fallout was coming faster than either of them had imagined. The staff meeting began like any other. A room filled with the low hum of idle chatter as teachers sipped coffee and shuffled papers. Emma sat near the back, her body tense and her mind elsewhere. The photos Izzy had received were burned into her memory, and the threat of exposure loomed over her like a storm cloud. She scanned the room, her gaze landing briefly on Sarah, who was seated near the front, chatting with the principal. Sarah's tone was light, her laughter frequent, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. Principal Whitman called the meeting to order, his usual affable demeanor on full display as he outlined upcoming school events and budget updates. Emma barely registered his words, her thoughts a cacophony of fear and regret. But then Sarah raised her hand, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Principal Whitman, before we move on, I wanted to mention something that might be of concern," she said, her tone measured but tinged with a dangerous edge. Emma's stomach dropped. Whitman adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowing. "Of concern? Go on, Sarah." Sarah's gaze swept the room briefly before settling on Emma. "It's come to my attention that one of our colleagues may have been engaging in inappropriate relationships outside of work. Relationships that could reflect poorly on the school if they were to become public knowledge." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the staff like a heavy blanket. Emma felt every pair of eyes turn toward her, the unspoken accusation loud and clear. Her face burned, her heart pounding so violently she thought she might be sick. Whitman's expression darkened. "Sarah, if you have concerns about a colleague's conduct, I would advise you to bring them to me privately." "Of course," Sarah said smoothly, but her gaze remained fixed on Emma. "I just thought it was important to address sooner rather than later." The meeting continued, but the damage was done. By the time Whitman dismissed them, Whispers had already begun to ripple through the room, each one sharpening the blade of Emma's humiliation. She avoided everyone's eyes as she left, her hands trembling as she gripped her bag. The summons came later that afternoon, an emergency meeting with the school board. Emma arrived at the office with her heart in her throat, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. When she entered the conference room, she was met with a row of stern faces and Principal Whitman seated at the head of the table. "We've received some troubling information," Whitman began, his tone grave. "And we need you to be completely honest with us, Emma." Emma sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know what you've heard, but—" Whitman held up a folder, flipping it open to reveal the photos. The same ones Izzy had received, now printed and spread out on the table like evidence in a trial. Emma's breath hitched as her worst fears materialized before her eyes. "These were sent anonymously to the school board," Whitman said. "Do you have anything to say about them?" Emma's throat tightened. "They're not. It's not what it looks like." "Then explain," one of the board members interjected, her tone cold. "Because these photos suggest a relationship with someone in the community." "Is that true?" Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to deny it, to protect Izzy, but the photos were damning. "It's not inappropriate," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Izzy and I are close. But this has nothing to do with my work." Whitman leaned forward, his expression a mix of disappointment and concern. "Emma, do you understand the position this puts the school in? Your personal life is your own, but when it threatens the reputation of this institution—" The door suddenly opened, cutting him off mid-sentence. All heads turned as Izzy walked in, her expression fierce and unyielding. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady. "But I need to speak." "Miss Blake, this is a private meeting," one of the board members said, her tone sharp. "I know," Izzy replied, her eyes never leaving Emma. "But you're discussing something that involves me, so I think I have a right to be here." Whitman sighed, rubbing his temples. "What is it you want to say, Miss Blake?" Izzy stepped forward, her shoulders squared. "Emma and I are in a relationship," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "We care about each other deeply. And while I understand that some people might see this as controversial, I won't stand by and let her take the blame for something that's mutual." The room erupted into murmurs, the board members exchanging shocked glances. Emma stared at Izzy, her heart aching with equal parts gratitude and fear. "This isn't about the school," Izzy continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "This is about two adults who found something meaningful in each other. And if that's a crime, then I guess I'm guilty too." Whitman held up his hand, silencing the room. "Ms. Blake, we appreciate your perspective, but the fact remains that this situation raises serious concerns about professionalism and public perception." Emma couldn't stay silent any longer. "Izzy has nothing to do with my work," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "She's not a teacher, and our relationship has never interfered with my responsibilities here. Whatever happens, leave her out of it." Whitman sighed again, looking between Emma and Izzy with weary eyes. "We'll need to conduct a full investigation," he said finally. "Until then, Emma, you're suspended with pay." The fallout was swift and brutal. News of the photos spread through Maplewood like wildfire, turning Emma and Izzy into the town's primary source of gossip. Emma's suspension made headlines in the local paper, while Izzy's reputation as a troublemaking outsider solidified among the more conservative residents. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. Emma and Izzy grew closer. For the first time, they could hold hands without fear, could look at each other without worrying who might be watching. Their love, once hidden in the shadows, now burned brighter than ever. One evening, as they sat on Izzy's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emma turned to Izzy, her expression soft but determined. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said. "But as long as I have you, I think I'll be okay." Izzy smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "We'll face it together. Whatever comes next." And though the road ahead was uncertain, for the first time in years, Emma felt free. The decision to leave Maplewood wasn't made in a single moment. It came slowly, piece by piece, as Emma and Izzy sat together in the quiet aftermath of the storm, piecing their lives back together. The weight of the judgment they faced in the town, Emma's suspension, the whispers that followed them everywhere, and the veiled hostility Izzy endured from strangers, had become unbearable. It wasn't just about starting over, it was about survival. I can't stay here, Emma confessed one night, her voice soft but resolute. They were sitting on Izzy's couch, the remains of dinner still on the table, untouched. Every time I walk down the street I feel like they're all staring, waiting for me to fail. I'm not sure I even belong here anymore. Izzy took Emma's hand, her thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. Then let's leave, she said, her voice steady. Come with me to New York. We can start fresh, somewhere no one knows us, somewhere we don't have to hide. Emma looked at Izzy, her heart swelling with equal parts fear and hope. It's such a big step. What if I don't fit there? What if I don't know how to be anything other than the Emma Hartman who teaches high school English in Maplewood? Izzy smiled, leaning closer. You don't have to fit anywhere but with me. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost: courage. The move happened quickly. They packed up their lives in Maplewood. Emma said quiet goodbyes to a few students and colleagues who had supported her, while Izzy sold her studio and pared down her belongings to essentials. The town that had once felt so small now seemed even smaller, its judgmental gaze unable to reach beyond its borders. By the time they loaded the last box into the car, Emma felt a strange mix of grief and relief. The drive to New York was filled with quiet moments and bursts of nervous laughter, the weight of their decisions settling over them like the horizon they chased. When they arrived, the chaos of the city immediately enveloped them. The honking of taxis, the rush of pedestrians, the constant hum of life moving forward. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. Their new apartment was modest but full of potential. Exposed brick walls framed large windows that let in streams of light, and the space was just big enough for them to build a life together. Izzy claimed one corner for her makeshift studio, setting up her camera equipment and laptop with a practiced efficiency, while Emma carefully unpacked her books and arranged them on the shelves with quiet reverence. It didn't take long for the apartment to feel like home. One evening, weeks after the move, the two of them settled into a quiet routine. The day's noise had faded, replaced by the soft hum of the city outside their window. Izzy sat at her desk, her laptop open as she edited a new series of photos. Portraits of strangers she had met at a nearby park, each image bursting with life and emotion. Her brow furrowed slightly as she adjusted the lighting on one shot, her focus unwavering. Emma, curled up on the couch with a book in her lap, watched Izzy with a quiet smile. It was moments like this, simple, unguarded, that reminded her why she had taken the leap. She turned her attention back to the book, her fingers brushing over the page as she began to read aloud. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, Emma paused, glancing at Izzy. Do you know this one? Izzy looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. Tennyson, right? Ulysses. It's one of your favorites. Emma nodded, her eyes bright. Made weak by time and fate but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Izzy pushed her chair back and crossed the room, sitting beside Emma on the couch. That's you know, she said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. Emma laughed, her cheeks flushing. I think you're giving me too much credit. I'm not, Izzy said, her voice firm. You've been through hell and you didn't let it break you. That takes strength. Emma looked at her, emotion welling in her chest. I couldn't have done it without you. Izzy leaned in, her forehead resting against Emma's. And you'll never have to. They stayed like that for a long moment, the world outside their apartment fading into insignificance. For the first time in months, the weight of their past seemed lighter, their future stretching out before them like an open road. Later that night, as Izzy returned to her editing and Emma lost herself in her book, the apartment felt alive with possibility. The scars they carried from Maplewood would never fully fade, but they had found something stronger in each other, something worth protecting, worth building a life around. For Emma, the uncertainty of the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like freedom.